Good afternoon and welcome to iScreemZ. Anyone who is a fan of the horror genre, and you obviously are because you wouldn't be watching my show if you weren't, is very aware that the ladies of Hammer Studios are genre royalty, which brings me to my guest today. She is absolutely one of the queens of that family. She's had a very, very legendary career that has spanned stage, television, and silver screen. She's worked alongside the greats such as Peter Cushing in Twins of Evil. And on a personal note, for my money, she's also starred in absolutely one of the funniest half hours of British television I've ever seen in my life. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the show Ms. Judy Matheson. Judy, how are you?
Hello, how lovely to be here all across the Atlantic. It's a miracle really, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's funny how, especially sort of in these pre-COVID times, how we've kind of embraced this technology, and it's really sort of opened up so many of these interview opportunities for all of us. It's wonderful.
Indeed. I haven't done Zoom for over a year now. I think I did it quite a lot during the lockdown, but I did worry about whether my iPad would cope with it again, but it has, and here we are, ready to go,
clear. We can hear each other, and so jumping straight into it, because you know what, honestly, you're one of those ladies that I honestly feel like, an hour is just not going to be enough time for this story. So I want to make sure that we get as much as possible. As I said at the beginning there, Judy, your career it's really been quite fascinating. I'm a big fan of stage as well as the silver screen. I want to ask you right out of the gate, who were some of your childhood inspirations when you were growing up?
Childhood actors.
Inspirations in general. Sure.
Well, yeah, theatre. My mother used to take me to the theatre a lot. For some reason, my father, you don't need to know this, but my father was a doctor, and he used to get sometimes free tickets for things like My Fair Lady when it was first on, and things like that, and West Side Story, and amazing things like that. And I think that would do it. Also, when I was at school, in senior school, when I was about 16, I did English literature, and we were taken to the theatre. We saw a lot of wonderful theatre. I was doing King Lear for my book, my Shakespeare, studying it, and I went to see the probably the finest King Lear there's been, and that was Paul Schofield doing Lear, which was wonderful when I was about 15 or 16. And also Albert Finney in Luther. That was another amazing thing, Royal Shakespeare thing. So those sort of things, but it was really teenage years, I would say, was my inspiration. Plus, of course, rock and roll.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the 60s here, right? When, oh my goodness, rock and roll, boom. So it really was.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Did you have a lot of musical inspirations at that time?
Yeah, well, all of them really, all the all the Americans, all the rock and rollers, all Little Richard, Presley. I mean, I just been to see the Presley film, and I just was knocked out by that guy's performance. It was wonderful, but it all came over from America, and I had older sisters, and they would go to see Bill Haley, which was slightly before my time, I must say. But the rock and roll, I mean, it permeated through. Everybody had a sort of radiogram, and they played all these 78 records. So yeah, it was a big thing. Plus, I have to say, something that's always overlooked. With this sort of thing, the 60s, jazz was a big thing, jazz clubs. Oh, if you went up from where I lived in the country to jazz clubs in London, that was the epitome of glamour as far as I was concerned. I mean, Juliette Greco, the sort of beat French actress, was you were asking about inspiration. She was a great inspiration.
Oh, wow.
Juliette Greco.
Really, eh? Wow. So getting a snapshot here. So you're a teenager, you're growing up, you're sort of you've come of age in this wonderful potpourri of music, and people really sort of discovering their voices, protest. It's just a wonderful time, music, theater, film. What's the point where you decide, you know what, I want to be a part of this, I want to be in entertainment?
Well, there wasn't one really. There wasn't one. I did extramural drama lessons at
Okay.
school. They were weirdly called, must be weird for Americans, but they were called elocution lessons, but they were drama lessons actually. And we used to enter festivals and win prizes sometimes, and we'd do single things, little talk, little duologues, sometimes two of you. And that was a big part of my poor father was always every weekend he was driving us around to festivals and taking part. And then it seemed completely automatic to apply for drama school, which I did.
And so you get in there, and you started on the stage, correct?
I did 3 years at drama school, but interestingly enough, because of various arrangements with grants and finances, it gave you a teaching degree as well. So I did a 3-year sort of teacher training college in a way, but it was also drama. And then you auditioned. If you wanted to be an actor or actress, you auditioned for the reps, the repertory theatres, which were ubiquitous then. They aren't around so much now, but they would give you an equity card. You had to have an equity card in order to work. You got your equity card by getting a job in a theatre, and I was really lucky. I was really lucky, and I got a job in the finest repertory company at the time, the Bristol Old Vic. But not only that, they took us to America, all over America. We went touring 3 Shakespeare plays. We played on Broadway. I mean, this is my first job. Can you imagine?
Amazing.
And we went to Canada, we went to Europe, we went to Israel. I wasn't doing very much. I was understudying, walking on, doing a lot of little bits here and there. But that was perfect. It was a perfect start. And from there on, I got an agent then after a year with the Shakespeare and doing all this touring. I went to London, sort of stopped in London and got a really good agent, and I was off.
Hazel Malone, right?
Yeah, Hazel Malone, fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
So wow. So that puts you right. So okay, I'm seeing this picture. So this puts you on a list with some of the amazing British talent on there, and Gregory Peck were you in a movie with Gregory Peck shortly after, right?
I certainly was. We did one day, two of us were sent along to the set, which was in London University actually at the time, and we were really just extras. We had a line each, I think. Janet Key was the other one. She was also a Hammer actress, but she was a very serious and very fine young actress. And we both sat there with our one lines and said a line to, actually not to Gregory Peck, to Anne Haywood. But it was cut. They were left on the cutting room floor. But I've got a photo up actually in my sitting room of a still with Gregory Peck and some of the students in the actual film. It seemed to be a lobby card, which is odd because you wouldn't think they'd just put a lobby card. It is actually a lobby card, and somebody sent it to me from America, and I'm so proud of it. But really, it was only one day filming.
One day filming, but you're off and you're running, right? You're out of the gate there and going. And this, so join the dots for me here, because obviously your big breakout was the Exquisite Cadaver, right? And I understand that's one of your favorite roles. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was a huge thing, which I don't think I really appreciated at the time, because I was chosen for it and I went to Spain to do it, to Barcelona, and I thought this is how your life is, playing leads in wonderful films. It was remarkable for its time. It was a wonderful film, and the director was absolutely, you talked about inspiration earlier. He was a complete inspiration to work with. And it had 3 amazing parts for women. And we're talking now, I think, 1969. feminist. It was a feminist film. When you look back and look at it, it was a real sort of feminist movie. It was a wonderful movie to do. And then after that, I did a lot of small bits on television, very small bits, which was, it didn't seem to me to be odd to be playing a lead for some months in Spain and then coming back and doing 1 or 2 lines in British television, because I've always, and I always say this when I'm talking to people, I was a jobbing actress. I just went where the work was. And if somebody offered me a nice job and I wanted to do it, then I did it, regardless of whether it was a very big part or a small part. It kept you going. I earned a very good living just by doing whatever came along, really.
What would you say is it? Not necessarily one, but what would you say were some of the most, obviously this was clearly a very important role for you, and you carry it in your heart. What would you say were some of the most important lessons you learned on the Exquisite Cadaver?
That's a really good question, because it's making me think, and I think I was a little bit callow. I think I was a callow youth. I think I took it all very much for granted. They sent cars for you in the morning and you were treated really well. And I just think I thought this was the life of an actor. Actor or actress, but I did, after the Exquisite Cadaver, I did sort of come down with a bump, because I was doing other things and I was staying in not very nice places and doing very small parts. But I don't know what I learned then. I think I could have learned better later, probably. I'm not sure. I loved doing it, but I can't remember going away learning any lessons. I must have learned how to do filming. It must have been amazing, but now I've done a lot of filming, so I don't know. I don't know really what I learned from it.
But it's funny, you make a really interesting point right there, because and what I love about these interviews is when I'm hearing your experiences, it's helping me reflect on my own as well. It's so funny how some of the lessons that we learn, we, like you said, we don't realize until later. The echoes come back and we're like, wow, I didn't, this was such a we wish we could go back and embrace it again, right? But obviously it led you to,
yeah, but I mean,
it led you on to ultimately 1971, which was a banner year for you, right? We had you literally were in a trifecta of horror classics: Lust for a Vampire, Twins of Evil, and Crucible of Terror. Let's kind of go through maybe in order there, because I tell you, I love the Karnstein trilogy there from Hammer. What are your vivid memories from Lust for a Vampire?
Oh, they're wonderful memories, actually. And it was only afterwards, again, it's the same thing. I didn't know that there was some angst amongst the production and the directors. I knew nothing about that. I just went. It was a wonderful summer in a wonderful location. You were treated really nicely, considering that one wasn't really doing very much. Though I was going right through the whole film, which was wonderful, because it meant that you were filming every day for about 6 weeks, and it was just you were made a fuss of, even though you were only doing a little bit, and you were given wardrobe fittings with beautiful clothes and beautiful hair being done in the morning. And what's not to love for a 23-year-old young woman? I mean, and also the girls. I mean, there were 3 of us who were given sort of actually named parts. And had little bits to do, but the rest of the girls didn't really have very much to do at all. They were just there. They were more or less what we used to call extras, but I think are called supporting actors now. But they were lovely girls. They were all like, everybody got on really well. Everybody made jokes. When you went in the morning, you just loved seeing all these lovely young women, and it was huge fun. The 3 main guys were also huge fun. And Jimmy Sangster. They were all laughing together and sort of joshing the girls in a nice way. I suppose it was a nice way. It's difficult to look back now on the Me Too situation, but they were actually perfect gentlemen, and they were actually just so funny and teasing us. And it was a wonderful shoot as far as I was concerned. Summer, and everybody just having fun. having fun. My second name for Lustre Vampire is Girls Just Want to Have Fun, because that's what we were doing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I can't even. I mean, you mentioned Jimmy Sangster. I mean, this guy's a legend to me, right? You know, when I look back at
Is he?
absolutely, absolutely, what a career he had. But did you, you know? And I've talked to a couple of ladies that, you know, sometimes it's hindsight is 2020. We look back and we see these things and they're classics now, right? And they're just timeless. Did you get any kind of vibe at the time that how big Hammer would continue to be over the years, and sort of, you know, what you were truly a part of there?
No. I can just say no. I mean, again, it was the jobbing actress thing. You went from one thing to the other. I didn't really look back at all. And also, the reason you and I are talking about this is because of the internet. I was wondering this morning, because I lived in South Africa for quite a while, and there was nothing to do with acting or anything there. And it was only when I came back did people start to acknowledge my work. And that was with the internet. Like, actually trying to think, when did Google, when did everything take off? Because that it's only because of the internet that you and I are talking now. I mean, not just physically, but generally around the place. Nobody would know who Judy Matheson is, except for the internet, except for people, aficionados, really, just loving Hammer, knowing more about Hammer, that like you. And I meet so many people that just know, they're really sort of erudite people who know about Hammer, know about way back the horror films, and the continuation of horror films right the way through the ages. And nobody'd know about that, really, except they'd be reading sort of dusty old books. But so I had no idea. To go back to your original question, I had no idea of that I would be talking to you all these years later.
That's it, you know, and it's so funny you say that, because, you know, there's a point, you say you had no idea you'd be talking about this, and then there's me as a young fella watching these, like sneaking downstairs at night to watch, like, oh, Judy, I could tell you, my dad caught me behind the couch more than one time there, sneaking to watch. And, you know, I would like to go back and tell myself, you know, in several years, you know, a couple of years down the line, you're going to be interviewing and talking to these people and getting to learn these experiences firsthand. And speaking of, you know, legends and experiences, you moved on to Twins of Evil, and we can't possibly not acknowledge, you know, Mr. Peter Cushing there. What was that like, working with Peter Cushing, who was a household name? Everybody knew at that time, right? What was that like on Twins of Evil?
Well, again, I think I took it a bit for granted. I was doing just a couple of days there. He was wonderful, though, and I had been told that he had. I think I'd been warned by the first assistant director that he'd had a recent bereavement. They didn't go into any detail, but they said, you know, I was quite an outgoing. I could have been sort of quite outrageous, I suppose. You know, they handled him gently, which I did. But he, of course, was very, very gentle with me, and he was very caring with me. He knew that I had a little bit of a scene where I was thrown to the ground and then I was going to be burned. And he was very, very considerate. He was very interested in me for that short time. And he was just lovely. He was a gentleman. What was wonderful about him is he was this gentle man. You're sitting by the side and you sit for a long time while they're lighting the set and they're doing things. And then as soon as he got up to act, that's why he always is an icon as far as serious acting is concerned, because he could just become that person instantly, and wonderful to work with. Where there's a little scene, I don't know if you remember it, but he comes into my house, my cottage, and stands in the doorway. Well, a few minutes before that, he'd been talking very gently to me and talking very nicely and asking if I was going to be all right during the scene. And then he comes into that scene and just looks the way he does. And it was wonderful. So he was wonderful to work with. He was a wonderful, wonderful actor to work off with, and I think I was really, really lucky to do that little scene with him. In fact, what happened when I went to see the producers, with the same producers as Lust for a Vampire, and we were talking about it, they were already offering me a part in Twins of Evil. I didn't have to audition because I'd already done Lust for a Vampire, and I must have turned up on time and said my lines right or whatever. But they outlined 3 of the smaller parts. I think the very small young women's parts, and I chose this one specifically because it had a scene with Peter Cushing. It was with Peter Cushing. It was a sort of duologue of 2 of them, and I didn't know it was going to be the pre-credit sequence at all. I knew nothing about that. I knew it was going to be this little scene. And it's since become sort of quite an iconic little scene now because it is the pre-credit sequence, and the music is so fantastic. So the whole thing is actually rather special. It's very small. It's only 4 minutes. I've timed it, but it's very special.
It's a terrific. It really is a terrific film. I absolutely one of my favorite Hammers, bar none. And you did some of your own. You did your own stunts on that, right? Is that correct?
It wasn't really a stunt. Yeah, yes. There was no stand in there. No, I did it, but it wasn't really a stunt. I never felt threatened. They were always taking care of me. Yes, that's nobody else up on the cross screaming but me. And I've told this story so many times, it's stayed in my memory. But you get on really well with the crew, and I love filming because it's so collaborative. But when it comes to acting, and I always say I'm sort of quite a serious actress, in fact, you have to sort of think about it quite carefully. And then I was put up on this cross, and I can't remember it terribly well, the whole thing. But I do remember when I finished screaming, when John Huff said cut, which he seemed to me to just go on forever. I mean, I thought he'd gone out and had a cup of tea or something. And then there was silence in the whole set. There was silence when I stopped screaming and he said cut. And then the whole crew burst into applause, which was amazing moment in my career to have the crew clap because I'd been screaming for so long.
Oh my goodness gracious me. Yeah, that's epic. That's absolutely epic. And so Twins of Evil comes out, and that sort of caps off the Karnstein trilogy. And so I guess that brings us to Crucible of Terror. Now, how did that sort of come about for you, Crucible of Terror?
Well, again, that would be Hazel Malone.
Mm-hmm.
She had the lead lady in it, Mary Maud, and so I went up. I remember going to meet the guys who were directing and the cinematographer, and they gave me the part. Yeah, that's how it happened. They gave me the part of Marcia. I was really pleased to get Marcia, actually, because she's a bit of a bitch, and I like that. I would have liked to have done more of that. I did in my young days. I did rather too much innocence and not enough bitchiness, and yeah, and that was fun. I think Hazel Malone probably did a bit of a deal because she had Mary Maud playing the lead. She didn't have Beth Morris. Beth Morris is the other young woman in it, and she wasn't with Hazel Malone, but that's how that came about. It was huge fun. That was, again, a few weeks down in Cornwall, nice weather, everything very pleasant.
And I'm seeing this trajectory here, as we're going through Hammer and Crucible of Terror, and then you worked with another one of my, who I think is a very underrated director, is Pete Walker. When you did the Flesh and Blood show, that man has never made a boring movie in his career. They're wonderful. Do you have any particular vivid memories from the Flesh and Blood show?
Well, I remember quite. Yes, I do. I do have a lot of, actually, weirdly, I have a lot of vivid memories. It was very, very cold, and Pete Walker's always a low budget. So, in fact, what happened for most of the film, that we were filming in the theatre, it was in Brighton, and they used to pick us up in a sort of minibus. All of us actors, all the actors, would be picked up in a minibus and driven down to Brighton, which takes about 2 hours. So it must have been about 6 o'clock in the morning, and that happened every day. He didn't put us up, which normally in a normal film you'd be put up there. We did stay when we went up to Cromer, which was the outside shots, and that weird beginning of. With Luann, yeah, I have very vivid memories. I have we drove up there in my little yellow Mini, Luann and I. Luann was a wonderful person and a wonderful actress, actually, but because she was so gorgeous, I don't think she got her due, because she was very clever. She was a very clever actress, and yeah, I just remember it all very, very, very well. I remember Robin, and I remember, just all of those actors. Yes.
Oh, Robin Asquith was right. You worked with him a couple of times in your career, yeah?
Yeah, more than a couple of times, because a couple of times, you see, he was with Hazel as well, so she probably was doing deals all over the place.
Gotcha.
She's sort of saying you can have 2 of them for the price of 1 or something. But before any of the filming I'd done a sort of corporate film with Robin, and also if you were with the agent, you often saw people en passant in the office. I mean, you'd go in, you'd call in to see Hazel about something or other, and there'd be Susan George just leaving, or Judy Matheson, or Malcolm McDowell was often in the office when I was there, and so I worked with Robin a few times. Well, yeah, but in 2 films, in fact.
And it's funny you mentioned Malcolm. You were almost cast in Clockwork Orange, right?
Well, no, I wasn't really. I went to an audition and walked out of it. In fact, I can't believe that I did that. I cannot believe that I did that. It was quite. There was Jimmy Liggett, was a very famous casting director, and he had called me in to audition for Kubrick. And he was doing it on film or video. I don't know if they had video in those days, but nowadays they do that all the time, and all the young people don't mind at all. But I didn't like the idea of auditioning for Kubrick on film. But then when he asked me to take off the dressing gown that I had on and do it topless, I just said, no, I'm not doing that. And I walked out because I didn't think it was right to be, this was well, obviously before the internet, but I hadn't even seen in the future that if you had taken your clothes off for an audition, it could go anywhere. It could be in any film at all.
Right.
Looking back, at the time, I didn't think that. I just thought it was very rude of the director to not be there for a start, sitting behind a camera somewhere. He was famously sort of withdrawn, wasn't he? He didn't really like to socialise. I didn't know any of that. I mean, I feel a complete fool now to walk out on a Kubrick audition, probably the best audition I probably ever had, though the part wasn't much. I think it was, I'm not sure which one it was, but it wasn't very much. And I didn't even just walk out of the audition. I didn't walk out. I went home and rang my union, Equity, and said, there's this director who's asking young women to take their clothes off on film, and complained. I complained about Kubrick to my union. I'm embarrassed to think about it now.
I'm going to flip the coin on that, if you don't mind, Judy. I don't think that's embarrassing at all. I think that makes you incredibly brave. And I actually, you know what? I find that very heroic, because you know what? I'm deadly serious. Hindsight, yes, Kubrick was a fantastic director, great, but everything you're saying to me makes all the sense in the world as a human being. And we look in hindsight at what happened to Shelley Duvall and her career. So no, I don't think you have anything to be embarrassed about. I think actually you should wear that like a badge of honor, if you don't mind me saying so.
You've made me feel much better about it, and you're exactly right. I hadn't ever thought about the Shelley Duvall thing. I should have done. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Anyway, I didn't get the part, and I probably wouldn't have got the part anyway, but still I would have been topless on some film somewhere.
I don't
mind that. I mean, I've been topless. I mean, during the 60s, everybody was. I mean, Glenda Jackson, and Judy Dench. You know, it has to be professional. It can't just be sort of. But there we are. But thank you. You make me feel better.
I'm glad. I'm glad I do, because again, like what you're saying, you know, doing other topless roles and stuff. You know, people do stage. They do nudity on stage and what have you. But like you said, it's professional. It's on your terms. You know what you're signing up for. It's completely different than walking into a room and some jumped up director saying, right, take your clothes off so I can see whether you're good for the role or not. I actually think that's disgraceful. So good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I got to ask you, actually, I know that this may not necessarily be one of your most vivid memories, but I do want to ask anyway. Obviously, you did so much British and US television. You know, you know, things like, you know, Z Cars and Blake Seven, which is a massive favorite of mine. You know, The Professionals. I've heard some very interesting stories about working with Gene Barry, and I know that you did an episode of The Adventurer. Was that a positive experience?
It was. It was fine. It was absolutely fine. Again, I don't think I realized it was the pre-credit sequence, but you know, he was for me. It was wonderful because he was very much the glamour Hollywood guy. He had the American voice, and you know, he was very glamorous, and he wore wonderful trousers, and but he didn't want anybody tall. So the scene had me coming in through the door and sitting down, but in fact, he had to have me starting my scene sitting down already. My whole scene with him was sitting down because I was as tall as he was, and he didn't like that. I mean, I didn't mind. I was fine. I mean, and he was fine to work with, and I really enjoyed it. And it was for Val Guest, who I think is a wonderful director, and he also directed Confessions of a Window Cleaner, which is not a wonderful film, but he is a wonderful director. It was lovely to work for him, and also I worked for him twice. It's always good to work for a director twice.
And it's funny. I obviously I won't bring up another person, but yes, I've heard that multiple times about Gene Barry's consciousness of his height and people working with him. So yeah, yeah, that's interesting that you said that. Now, obviously, you know, The Adventurer, you know, Crossroads. You know, I'm going to come to this because it was one of the most initial things that you and I were talking. Citizen Smith, that episode where poor Wolfie, he gets lured into that trap. Oh my goodness. Judy, listen, I love that show, but that is one of my favorite half hours of British comedy ever. I never cease to break up every time I watch it. What was do you have any memories from working on Citizen Smith?
I do. I have lots of I think it comes from talking about all this stuff, but I do have memories. Yes, first of all, John Sullivan had seen me in Crossroads of all things, and he'd asked for me for that role. He'd obviously thought that it was similar, and I was again very flattered because he'd seen my performance, which is in a soap that's on every day, and he'd asked for me, and I had to go and see the producer who had to check me out. So I remember that very clearly, and I remember getting it. And the weird thing is, I've heard it's the most popular of all Citizen Smith, that particular episode, and the wonderful actors in it. They're all wonderful actors. Robert, whatever his name is, Robert, I've gone mad now. But they're just all very, very good actors, and they had a wonderful script. So it was wonderful to work on. But I had just been working up in the theatre in Sheffield. And I remember we rehearsed it during, you know, the week, and then we did it in front of a live audience. And I remember being quite upset about my performance afterwards, because I thought I had reacted to the live audience, because I'd been on the stage just the week before for a month up in Sheffield, and I thought that I'd overacted with it. I did really think that. I was quite depressed after the shoot, you know, the filming of it with the audience. Having seen it several times since, or people talking about it, I obviously think I did it. I did it all okay, but I remember feeling quite low that I'd overacted.
It was no perfect.
But Oh, it was. Oh, that's down to John Sullivan, really, and the other actors. Robert Lindsay is who I was talking about. Robert Lindsay is a very, very fine actor, actually.
Yeah,
that was his first big role, but he's gone on to do, and he's very, very versatile.
oh, absolutely. He's gone on to do many, but I don't know, man. I just that one just cracks me up. That really does crack me up. Always gives me
the song is one.
Oh, yeah, because he got you all back. Wolfie got you all back at the end. He got his revenge. Got to give him that credit for that. But you know, I do want to ask you, because you know, you being such a obviously such a glamorous face of film and television, you know, through that era. We know, Judy, both you and I know that, you know, there are a lot of people out there that, you know, we, like you say, horror aficionados, we love and we respect this genre and these things. And you know, you do a lot of conventions yourself, right? And you meet a lot of fans. But there are the occasional person that just, they can't separate this is a person doing a job from this is, you know, a character in a film. Have you ever had any experiences that have kind of pushed your boundaries a little bit, where you've kind of had to say, you know, well, calm down a little bit. This was just a film. This was a film I was doing here.
No, I haven't really had any awful experiences at all. It is weird, because when I was doing that soap, which Crossroads, you would walk around. I suppose people in EastEnders and all of the soaps now do that, but people think you're that person. They call you by the name. You might meet them in a pub or in a restaurant, or somebody may come up and they talk to you as though you are that person. And that's strange. But no, I've not really had any, nobody putting a foot wrong, really. I think I look back on the Me Too thing, which I'm very sympathetic with, but I really never had any problems with it. And I think it was just because I'm pretty forthright, to put it politely.
Definitely sounds that way, so that's excellent. That's good. And you know, it's nice. It's nice to hear that. And you know what? You know, you mentioned Me Too. As a man, it's nice for me to hear you say that, oh yeah, this person was a gentleman and I had a great, it's nice to, because we got to remember that there's good and bad people in all walks of life, right? You know, and it's nice to hear that you had great experiences. As you went into the 80s, it seems that you went more in the direction of news anchoring and sort of voiceovers and stuff. Was that a conscious choice? Were you kind of sort of done with acting, or what was the story there, Judy? Why did you sort of go in that direction? I'm curious.
Well, I met this boy, and he became my boyfriend. And after a couple of weeks of meeting him, he said, "How would you like to drive through Africa with me?" And I said, I thought, oh, well, this sounds interesting. He had a Land Rover. So we did that, actually. I went with this guy that I didn't really know very well through Africa, which was very hairy, very exciting, and quite dangerous in retrospect. And it took us about 6 months to drive from London to Nairobi, through the Sahara Desert and all sorts of extraordinary things. And then when I arrived in Nairobi, I got a job in the theatre there, completely a different story altogether. Which, but when I came back, I did feel that things had changed. I did feel that I had changed. It was a life-changing experience, living and working in Africa. And fortuitously, completely fortuitously, somebody told me that the new TV franchise down in the south of England, they just won the franchise, was looking for a trainee continuity announcer. And they said they thought, whoever it was recommending me said they thought I had the right voice for it. So I went and auditioned for that. And then they took me on as a trainee. I was trained to be a television announcer. And that's what I did for I think 4 years before I got pregnant by the guy I'd gone to Africa with, who I'm still with. But it wasn't really news anchor. A news anchor is more of an American word, and that's the news reader. We say news reader. I did do bits of news, local news, but it was really continuity announcing. you know, all those bits in between the programs. So it was very different from acting, because it was actually quite boring, because you sit there for hours watching Gregory Peck films and things like that. And then every now and again, in those days, it's complete panic, because they'd lose the commercial break. Something would go wrong and you'd have to talk for 2.5 minutes off the top of your head. So
Wow.
it was moments of complete boredom with interspersed with total panic. So it was, and I did that job, actually. I did do that job on and off for a few years after that. I helped to start British satellite television, which became Sky, actually, eventually. So that was all. It was all quite interesting. It was quite different, very different from acting.
That's quite momentous here when you mention that about Sky, because my goodness, we all know how huge that became.
Indeed, but in fact, at the time, I was working for British satellite television, and it had been going for a year, and it was a very glamorous thing, and they paid a lot of money. And then suddenly these Australians were walking around the studio and sort of doing sort of sizing things up. And then we realized that it was a takeover bid, in fact, and Sky took over BSB. And so actually we were all a bit sore about that. We were a bit cross and not very happy that Sky had done that for various reasons. But as you say, now it's huge.
Massive, right? But ultimately your trajectory did bring you back to the screen, because 2020, The Haunting of Margam Castle. How did that feel, being back on the screen again, back in movies?
Well, I did a little film for the Misty Moon Film Society called Frankula, funny sort of 20-minute spoof horror. And that was the first time I'd been in front of a camera for many, many, many years. I mean, a drama camera, I should say, film camera. And then I did a couple of other little bits, but the Haunting of Margam Castle, I had hardly anything to do in it. The guy was absolutely wonderful, and sadly, he's just died. He's just died. So, and he was only 39. The director, I mean.
Oh my goodness gracious me!
That's really sad. He was a very prolific. All his sort of films went straight to video, and it was altogether lovely. But it's been rather saddened all of us, because sadly he's died.
Oh, that's my condolences. That's very sad. But it did bring you back to us, so that's wonderful, to the screen. And you mentioned Misty Moon. I see, obviously, you do a lot of projects still with, sort of with Caroline in particular. I know Emma Dark was in Frankula as well, I think. Who was
she was. There were three of us. The three of us were together.
Friend we share in common.
Not vampires. We were vampires.
Beautiful. What can you tell the audience about Misty Moon?
Misty Moon was a film society. It was sort of small, quite small, and they used to do evenings with actors talking, evenings with, as it were, talking about your career. And somebody to do with Misty Moon saw me at a convention and asked me to join them. They subsequently invited me to be their patron, one of their patrons, and I did. But they've grown exponentially. What's that word? I've used the wrong word now. I've used the right word, mispronounced it. But it just has grown. It's grown, and now they do their own productions of films, which are lovely. They've just done a film which has won so many awards. I mean, award after award after award, and they produced it. Stuart Morris. I'm actually going to the Misty Moon tomorrow. They've got an afternoon with another actress, and I'm going to it because it's the curator's birthday, so we're going to celebrate that tomorrow.
Interesting. I will actually drop a link for anyone that wants to know more about Misty Moon. I'm going to drop a link in at the bottom of this video so that people can check that out. I do. This has been we're coming up on time, and this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. I do want to ask you one question that I ask every lady that I interview on here, because, you know, I've heard so many inspirational stories. You know, Judy, somewhere out there, there will be a young girl or maybe a young boy that is discovering Twins of Evil, or, you know, one of these wonderful, you know, productions that you've been in, and that spark goes off, and they, you know, they think, maybe that's something I'd like to do. I'd like to be on the screen. I'd like to be on the stage. What unique piece of advice do you offer to that boy or girl that maybe sees you in Twins of Evil and thinks that's for them, that's what they want to do?
You put me on the spot there. I've got to think out, but I actually don't have to think about it. You know, because you don't have to belong to a union now, people just think they can just do it. And particularly with film acting, they you know, do a bit of filming. They may do an indie film. They don't get paid for it. So I would, my one piece of advice would be to get some training, some professional training, and then practice. Really.
Practice.
But nowadays, it seems, and you do get actors, they're now being mic'd all over the place in theatres, which I find quite upsetting. I don't, you know, they didn't need to be, I mean, you didn't need to give a mic to Judi Dench, for instance, on the stage. And now they are doing that because they're not being, I sound like some really old-fashioned person, but I think you need to be trained to be an actor. I think it is a craft.
Absolutely.
And a talent. It's a craft.
Absolutely. That is wonderful. Judy, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I have really...
Well, thank you for taking time with me.
I've enjoyed
it. Comes out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been wonderful. I've learned a lot. And please give my regards to, I know you obviously still see a lot of the Hammer ladies like Valerie and Caroline. Please give my regards. Let them know that there is a red carpet to iScreemZ. Hammer ladies are instantly iScreemZ approved anytime. Okay. So I wish you well, and thank you very much for being on the show, Judy.
Well, thank you for your time as well, Stephen. Best of luck for the rest of iScreem.